Hey there, my name is Anthony Romano, and today I'm going to tell you about how the ketogenic bulking methods work the way they do. So, I have another video on my page where I talk about a study I reviewed where basically they had taken a group of ketogenic diet people and a group of non-keto people and made them do resistance training for 11 weeks, and the ketogenic diet group had higher muscle gains and less fat mass after, and they had used a DEXA scan throughout that study. They had used a ultrasound as well to measure their muscle mass, and I also riff off a little bit about my personal experiments with scales, electronic scales, that generally show an upward trend in my muscle mass, skeletal muscle percentage, as I was losing 35 plus pounds of fat. So, all within several months. So that is kind of a prerequisite. If you are new to keto and you think I'm just spitting out BS to you about, my experience with keto bulking and ketogenic dieting and gaining strength on my cuts and things like that, if you are new, then you're going to want to check out that video. If you're not new and you're familiar with keto, then you're probably up to speed and you won't be falling behind on some of the things I'm throwing out here. So, off the top of my head, I'm just going to throw out as many mechanisms in the body and explanations for why, keto bulking methods work just as effectively as other bulking methods, and essentially break down the only requirements from what we know nowadays scientifically that are required for bulking and why keto can still satisfy those categories. So, with keto bulking, right, what are the things we know about bulking? You're going to need a calorie surplus, right, an energy surplus. You're going to need adequate protein. Okay, there's a lot of debate over the amounts of protein you would need, but in general, somewhere between 0.7 grams of protein per pound of body weight to a pound and a half or 1.5 grams of protein per body weight. Somewhere around there. I've experimented with many myself, and my personal results have always been lean gains with good strength increase. I'll probably have a video out soon on my 10 egg a day bulk video as well, but I also have a video called All Golden Era Bodybuilders Were Keto, and in that video I basically explained that a lot of the classic bodybuilding methods, because if you're watching this, I'm assuming it's for bodybuilding and fitness purposes, were very high fat, high protein diets, and they were pretty devoid of carbs except for occasionally. It almost was structured like a targeted keto diet, which is basically where you have carbs around your exercise time on certain days, not every day. And because a lot of these older bodybuilders were using high fat dairy products, high fat meals, red meat, right? They weren't eating just chicken and rice like we do nowadays. They would have high fat dairy products, always loading on the high fat meats, red meats, with good cholesterol, large amounts of eggs, and occasionally carbs were thrown in here and there on random days. If you look up any sort of golden era plan, you'll see this as well. So, with the actual mechanisms required for muscle building, you might have heard of the mTOR pathway. And mTOR is basically the master controlling pathway of all muscle building. And mTOR can be stimulated by a few things, but oftentimes people will tell you on a bulk you need carbohydrates. They'll tell you that you need carbs in order to build muscle. And this is not necessarily true, but you do need insulin. So insulin is one thing that gets stimulated in great amounts when you have large amounts of carbohydrates. So when you have carbohydrates, your insulin's going to rise higher than when you eat fat or when you eat protein. But protein is still adequate to stimulate insulin, and it's one of the things that can activate mTOR, basically. So leucine is another thing. Leucine is an amino acid which is often referred to as the most anabolic amino acid. And it also does stimulate your insulin when you consume leucine. So from what I've researched and the mechanisms that I have relied upon when I'm doing my keto bulks, I am trying to increase, insulin at certain points of the day, but also trying to throw in that leucine. So if you're getting a diet that is, adequate in protein, right, from a complete protein sources, getting enough amino acids of all types, and also maybe BCA supplementation on a keto bulk, not necessarily necessary on a keto cut. And basically you're stimulating insulin as necessary through various protein sources, getting enough calories, being in a calorie surplus, energy surplus, which is easier to do from eating fatty foods. It's easier to overeat them, well, eat higher calorie amounts of them because they're more calorie dense per gram. Basically, you have a lot of easy tools to work with for bulking and doing it leanly, because you want an optimal amount of insulin to be increased. So insulin can be increased from eating protein foods and also from eating higher amounts of calories. So typically, people know insulin for its fat storing properties, because if you have too much insulin or you're too insulin resistant, which means you're not able to use insulin as effectively, which is the opposite of what keto does. Keto makes you more effective at using insulin and more insulin sensitive. Basically, you're increasing your insulin sensitivity and then getting an optimal amount of insulin, which that optimal amount is going to be a lower number than somebody who's insulin resistant. If you're doing keto already, you're priming your insulin sensitivity to build muscle. And basically that mTOR pathway is going to be activated adequately from the insulin you're consuming, and you're not going to be as likely to add fat due to the fact of increased insulin sensitivity, and you probably won't be spiking your insulin like crazy like you would from a high carb meal. So that doesn't mean that every keto meal is going to make you less likely to store fat, but it means in the long run of things, if you take a keto bulk compared to a carb bulk, theoretically, because of the lack of insulin being spiked more than it has to be with the keto side of things, you should be adding less fat. So some people will say, you know, calories are the only thing that matter, and calories are a primary driver of fat loss and fat gain. But there's a way to get more precise than this. The way to get more precise is that the types of food you're eating, right? Because you don't want to be too much of a consequentialist with your fat gaining theories, okay? You don't want it to be only calories in, calories out. You can get more precise and say, hey, what types of foods, what types of calorie sources are going to be more likely to cause fat? You know, insulin sensitivity is a large determiner of when you're going to add fat. So somebody who has a better insulin sensitivity will add less fat at the same amount of calories as somebody who has a higher insulin resistance. So when it comes to muscle building, that insulin sensitivity is key, and getting enough that would adequately stimulate mTOR and enough leucine as well, because leucine is capable of stimulating mTOR on its own, would be adequate to add certain amounts of lean muscle. Now, I do have that one study I referenced in another video. There are other studies as well, but there needs to be a lot more on fat-adapted keto diets. Most of these studies are on non-fat-adapted keto diets, which basically takes keto from individuals who aren't as effective at using it. So part of my page's purpose is to make a push for more fat-adapted studies. I myself try to be an example of this over 7 years of keto bodybuilding, but the whole takeaway for you is that although we have limited amounts of scientific proof, but that proof does show that it's a valid path to take. If you are looking for a method to lean bulk, then I absolutely recommend keto bulking. I know for me, I've had my share of dirty bulks in my life, and I don't want to go through that ever again. So my bulks going forward are all going to be keto bulks with little bits of carbs here and there if I want them. So overall, this should just open your eyes to the possibility of this as a lean bulking method. Every time I've done it, I've always added less fat. My strength gains have seen larger increases personally when I've had higher fat foods in my diet rather than sticking to a more so of a carb approach. And I believe that's due to the fact that fat per gram has more energy than carbs per gram. So people will often tell you, oh, be careful eating the fats because they're 9 calories per gram. Meanwhile, carbs are only 4. That's true, but it's a double-edged sword, because on one hand, it's easier to overeat if you're cutting with those fats. Well, it's easier to overdo your calories. But on the other hand, that means that fat is a more effective energy source, because there's an example from the Bulletproof Diet book that I've read where basically when you buy gasoline, the higher amounts of energy per liter is a higher octane fuel. So it's the same with fat. Fat is a higher octane fuel that gives you more energy for the same amount of grams as carbs and protein, basically, even though protein's not necessarily an energy source. So overall, keto bulking has always granted me leaner gains with very effective strength gains. And I've always noticed I've added less fat. And although, hey, you might be new to this, it might be more of a slow process, but overall, as a lifestyle for fitness and bodybuilding, I wholeheartedly stand by it. And I know that's what I'm going to be doing going forward for my personal bulking methods, to stay lean year round basically and add lean muscle as effectively as I can. So hopefully this gave you some insight into some of the scientific mechanisms behind bulking on keto, understanding it more, understanding what is necessary for a keto bulk, being the insulin sensitivity, the leucine, insulin itself, and how they all interact with mTOR. And of course, getting adequate protein, adequate calorie surplus, right? Energy surplus. But hopefully it helped you understand this as a whole. And besides that, leave me some questions in the comments. I answer everybody. And if you want a free keto training plan or meal plan, I have those in the description as well. And they're linked to my keto transformation contest, where you can win prizes if you want to enter and finish that contest by September 7th, 2019. Thank you for watching. My name is Anthony Romano. Subscribe and click the notification bell. Peace.